Civilizations perpetuate the immortal effects of what they present in the history of humanity in various intellectual, ethical, and material aspects, and that our civilization has played a dangerous role in the history of human progress, and left in the fields of belief, science, governance, philosophy, art, literature, and other long-term effects that have a strong influence in what modern civilization has reached. So what are the implications? What is its importance? First, in the field of belief and religion. The principles of Islamic civilization had a great impact on the religious reform movements that took place in Europe from the 7th century until the era of the modern Renaissance. Islam declared the unity of God and his uniqueness with authority and his freedom from anthropomorphism, injustice, and imperfection, and also declared the independence of man in his worship, his connection with God and his understanding of his laws without the mediation of clerics. It was a great factor in opening people's minds to these powerful and wonderful principles, and the peoples at that time were being thrown in the shackles of violent sectarian strife and submission to the authority of the clergy over their ideas, opinions, money, and bodies. It is natural, when his conquests in the East and West have reached what they have reached, for the nations surrounding him to be influenced by his principles of belief above all. This is what actually happened, when in the 7th century AD there were those who deny the worship of images in the West. Then after them came those who deny the mediation between God and his servants, and call for independence in understanding the holy books away from the authority of the clergy and their supervision. Many researchers confirm that Luther, in his reform movement, was influenced by what he read to Arab philosophers and Muslim scholars in terms of religion, belief, and revelation, and European universities in his time were still relying on the books of Muslim philosophers that were translated long ago into Latin. And we can confirm that the movement of separation of religion and state that was announced in the French Revolution was the result of the violent intellectual movements that dominated Europe for 3 centuries or more, and our civilization had the merit of lighting its roots through the Crusades and Andalusia. Second, in the field of philosophy and science. In the field of philosophy and the sciences of medicine, mathematics, chemistry, geography, and astronomy, Europe woke up to the voice of our scientists and philosophers studying these sciences in the mosques of Seville, Córdoba, Granada, and others. And the pioneers of the first Westerners to our schools were very admired and passionate about all these sciences they listen to in an atmosphere of freedom they do not know about similar in their countries, at a time when our scientists were talking in their scientific circles and writings about the rotation of the Earth and its sphere, the movements of the orbs and the celestial bodies. The minds of Europeans were filled with myths and delusions about all these facts. Then, among the Westerners, the translation movement from Arabic into Latin began, and the books of our scholars became taught in Western universities. The book, Al-Qanun, in medicine was translated by Ibn Sina in the 12th century, and the book, Al-Hawi, by Al-Raza was translated at the end of the 13th century, and these two books remain the measure of teaching medicine at the European university until the 16th century, and the books of philosophy continued more than that. And the West did not know the philosophy of Greece except through our writings and translations. Hence, many fair Westerners admit that in the Middle Ages we were European professors for no less than 600 years. Scholar Gustave Le Bon said, translations of Arab books, especially scientific books, remained almost the only source of teaching in European universities for 5 or 6 centuries. And he says the scholar, the Orientalist, Sidio, the Arabs were the only ones who carried the banner of the Middle Civilization, so they defeated the barbarism of Europe, which was shaken by the raids of the northern tribes, and the Arabs marched to the sources of the eternal philosophy of Greece, and the Arabs, when they practiced the science of the Commission, they gave special attention to all mathematical sciences, so they had a mug of honor, so they were our teachers in this field in truth. Humboldt says in his book on the universe, and the Arabs were the ones who created the chemical pharmacy, and from the Arabs came the first court commandments that were impersonated by the Salirman school and spread in southern Europe after a long time, and pharmacology, and the subject of medicine on which the art of healing is based led to the study of botany and chemistry simultaneously, from two different paths, and with the Arabs a new era for that science was opened. Sidio says on the authority of Al-Razi and Ibn Sina that they dominated the schools of the West for a long time, and Ibn Sina was known in Europe as a doctor, and he had absolute authority over its schools for nearly 6 centuries, so his book, Al-Qanun, which included 5 parts, was translated and printed several times, to be considered a basis for studies in universities of France and Italy. Third, in the field of language and literature, Westerners, especially Spanish poets, were greatly influenced by Arabic literature. The literature of equestrianism, enthusiasm, metaphor, and elegant high-end imaginations entered Western literature through Arabic literature in Andalusia in particular. The well-known Spanish writer Abanes says, Europe did not know chivalry and did not owe its honorable manners nor its enthusiastic brotherhood before the arrival of the Arabs to Andalusia and the spread of their knights and heroes in the countries of the south. Among the geniuses of literature in Europe in the 14th century and beyond, there is no doubt at all about the influence of Arab literature on their stories and literature. In the year 1349 Boccaccio wrote his tales called The 10 Mornings, following the example of 8001 Nights, from which Shakespeare quoted the subject of his play, The Lesson in the Ends, as he quoted German Lessing, his play Nathan al-Hakim. Chaucer, the imam of modern poetry in the English language, was the greatest adaptation of Boccaccio of his time, as he met him in Italy and later organized his famous stories called the Canterbury Tales. As for Dante, many critics assert that he was in the Divine Story, in which he describes his journey to the other world, influenced by the message of forgiveness for Al-Mahri and the description of heaven by Ibn Arabi. The news of horsemanship and the adventures of the knights for the sake of glory and adoration, and the 1001 Nights, after its translation into European languages in the 12th century, had a very great impact in this field, so that since then, more than 300 editions have been printed in all European languages until now, to be seen by a number of critics. The Europeans believe that Gulliver's Travels, composed by Swift, and Robinson Crusoe's Journey that Deva composed for 1001 Nights, and the Letter of Hayy bin Yaqsan by the Arab philosopher Ibn Tufayl. There is no need for us to mention what Arabic words entered into different European languages in all their different aspects of life, so that they are almost the same in the Arabic language, such as cotton, damask silk, musk, syrup, jar, lemon, yellow, and other countless things. Fourth, in the field of legislation, the contact of Western students with Islamic schools in Andalusia and other places had a great impact in transmitting a set of jurisprudential and legislative rulings to their languages, and Europe at that time was not on an elaborate system or just laws, even if the Napoleon era in Egypt translated the most famous books of Maliki jurisprudence into French. And among the first of these books, Khalil's book, which was the nucleus of French civil law, and it came very similar to the rulings of Maliki jurisprudence, the scholar Sidio says, it is the Maliki doctrine that stops our attention in particular because of our links with African Arabs, and the French government entrusted to Dr. Perron to translate into French the book Al-Muqtasar on Fiqh by Khalil bin Ishaq bin Yaqub, who died in 1422. Civilizations perpetuate the immortal effects of what they present in the history of humanity in various intellectual, ethical, and material aspects, and that our civilization has played a dangerous role in the history of human progress, and left in the fields of belief, science, governance, philosophy, art, literature, and other long-term effects that have a strong influence in what modern civilization has reached. So what are the implications? What is its importance?